Today, we're going to trace a ripple effect. It starts with some of the smallest creatures on Earth, but it ends up touching, well, pretty much everything. The food on your plate, the global economy, and even your own health. It's this hidden connection with absolutely massive consequences. So let's dive in.
So let's start with this question. I know, it sounds a little crazy, right? What could possibly connect your daily coffee to hundreds of thousands of deaths? But this question, it pulls back the curtain on a really fragile global network that we all depend on. And the answer, it's not one single thing. It's the quiet, constant work of some of our planet's most important creatures. And these are the heroes of our story, our planet's unsung heroes. To really get a handle on their massive impact, we first need to zoom in on the fundamental job they do.
And that job is pollination. Now, the definition here seems pretty straightforward, but you have to understand, this single process is the engine for nearly every ecosystem on land. It's that critical moment that lets plants reproduce, which in turn creates the fruits, the seeds, and the nuts that so much of life, including us, absolutely depends on.
So who's doing all this work? Well, this is what I think is so cool. When we hear pollinator, our minds usually jump straight to a honeybee. But the reality is so much bigger. Get this, there are over 20,000 species of wild bees alone. And it doesn't stop there. We've got butterflies and moths, hummingbirds, and even mammals like bats. And yeah, in some parts of the world, even little lizards get in on the action. It is a massive, incredible... Okay, so let's follow that first ripple as it spreads out. How does this tiny little miracle happening on a flower scale up to something that affects the entire planet? Well, it starts with the food in your kitchen.
And this chart just lays it out perfectly. A staggering 75%. That's 3/4 of the world's leading food crops depend, at least in some way, on animal pollination. We're not talking about a few niche items here. This is a gigantic slice of our global food basket.
So what does that 75% actually look like on your plate? Well, it's that cup of coffee you need to start your day. It's the chocolate for dessert. It's the almonds you snack on, the apples, the strawberries, all these staples of a healthy diet. Seriously, without pollinators, these foods would either become super rare and expensive, or they could just vanish from our stores altogether. And you know, this isn't just about ecology. It's about hard economics. Pollinators contribute up to 577 times billion dollars to the global food market every single year. They are a quiet, flying, absolutely essential part of the agricultural economy.
But the story doesn't end with food and money. The decline of these incredible creatures is creating another ripple effect, and this one touches on something even more fundamental: our health.
And this isn't some hypothetical what-if question for the future. Researchers are finding clear, troubling evidence that these connections are already starting to break down, and we're beginning to see the consequences in our global food supply. So, according to a major study, we're already seeing a 3 to 5% loss in the global production of fruits, vegetables, and nuts simply because there aren't enough pollinators to do the job. Now, you might look at that and think, okay, 3 to 5%, that doesn't sound catastrophic.
But here's where that tiny ripple becomes a tidal wave. When you translate that small percentage of lost crops into human lives, the number is devastating. That 3 to 5% loss of healthy, nutrient-rich food is estimated to be contributing to 427,000 excess deaths every year. These are deaths from things like heart disease, strokes, certain cancers, illnesses linked to diets that are missing the very foods pollinators provide. And that is the answer to our opening question.
So why is this happening? You know, it'd be great if there was one simple answer, one villain we could point to, but it's not like that. Pollinators are caught in a perfect storm of interconnected threats, and, well, a lot of them are driven by us.
This table kind of breaks it down. Intensive agriculture, for example, creates these huge fields of a single crop. For a bee that needs diverse food, that's basically a desert. Then you have pesticide use, which can cause direct harm. Climate change is a huge one. It's messing up the delicate timing between when flowers open and when the pollinators are actually active. And on top of all that, you've got things like parasites, that infamous varroa mite, spreading like wildfire through bee populations. The IPBES report really zooms in on one key driver here: pesticides, especially a class called Neonicotenoids. The science is pretty clear that they can have both lethal and what they call sublethal effects. Now, sublethal is a really key word. It means it might not kill a bee outright, but it messes with its brain, its ability to navigate, to reproduce. But, and this is where it gets complex, the report also points out that the data on how this affects entire managed honeybee colonies is, in their words, conflicting. A whole colony is like a superorganism, right? It can sometimes absorb losses that would totally wipe out a single wild bee. It just shows how complicated this problem really is.
Okay, I know. Facing a perfect storm like that can feel pretty overwhelming. But here's the good news. The science also points us toward clear strategic solutions. So let's look at the path forward, at how we can start to mend this incredible web of life. The plan really boils down to three main ideas. First is ecological intensification. It's a fancy term, but all it means is farming with nature, not against it. And that leads right to the second point, diversifying our farms. Instead of those giant crop deserts, we support systems like agroforestry, where you mix trees and shrubs with crops to create healthier habitats. And finally, we have to invest in ecological infrastructure. Just think of it like building highways and rest stops for pollinators, planting wildflower strips, preserving natural habitats, and connecting them all together across the landscape.
So, we've come full circle. Our food, our economy, our health, it's all deeply connected to the fate of these tiny creatures. The connection isn't hidden anymore. The ripple effect is crystal clear. So the only question that's really left is the one you see right here. Are we ready to help the creatures that we so clearly depend on?